Well, there is a mix of hope and despair in the coronavirus story today. Europe's first human trial of a potential vaccine is underway in the UK, while the jobless rate continues to climb in the United States. Globally, cases have passed 27 million. 190,000 people have died. 740,000 have recovered. Here are today's developments. Tasmania has recorded its 9th death from coronavirus. National Cabinet is meeting today with education a top priority for leaders. Updated modelling of the virus spread will also be released. The Ruby Princess cruise ship is on its way to the Philippines. It has been linked to more than 700 cases in Australia and 21 deaths. The first patients have been injected as part of a UK vaccine trial. Half will receive the potential COVID-19 treatment and half a control vaccine which protects against meningitis. The US unemployment rate is at levels not seen since the Great Depression. 26.5 million Americans have lost their jobs, 4.4 million this week alone. And EU leaders have agreed to an emergency funding plan to help Europe's struggling economies. They've also backed a gradual lifting of virus restrictions. Well, from today, anyone with even mild respiratory symptoms can be tested for coronavirus as the New South Wales government tries to clamp down on community transmission. Premier Gladys Berejiklian says increased testing is a critical step towards lifting physical distancing restrictions.
New South Wales is now saying to anybody across the state, if you have symptoms, if you're worried you have the COVID-19, if you've been in contact with anyone and you're concerned you have the disease, please come forward and get tested. We're increasing the testing to include everybody across the state, not just those who work with vulnerable people, not just those who live in those high-risk areas where we've had clusters, but anybody across our state who has symptoms, who's concerned they might have it, who's been in contact with someone who's had it, and especially those who work with vulnerable communities or in close contact with many people, please come forward and get tested. We want to see the number of tests go up above 8,000 every day. So we really want to boost our testing because as we consider lifting restrictions, we have to have more tests, we have to have more people come forward, and we really want that to happen.
Well, National Cabinet is meeting today with leaders expected to consider the latest modelling on how coronavirus is spreading in Australia as they look at how and when some of the restrictions can be eased. Political reporter Jade Macmillan has more from Canberra.
Well, it's been around a week since the Prime Minister announced that if Australia could continue to bring the number of coronavirus cases down, that National Cabinet could look at easing some of those restrictions that have been put in place. Scott Morrison put a 4-week time period on that plan and we're about a week in. So leaders are expected today to look at the progress that has been made so far. And the Chief Medical Officer, Brendan Murphy, is expected to provide them with the latest modelling on the spread of the virus in Australia at the moment. We're also expecting that modelling will be released to the public after the National Cabinet meeting wraps up. And Brendan Murphy has also provided some suggestions of what the first restrictions to be lifted might be. He told a Senate committee yesterday that while we shouldn't expect to see any major changes to Australia's travel restrictions anytime soon or to the rules around large gatherings, there might be some easing of the restrictions around small gatherings and community sport if that good progress can continue to be made.
Now, Jade, as we know, this is as much a medical crisis as it is an economic one, and the federal government is looking at that economic recovery once the crisis passes. What's the latest on that?
Well, the Prime Minister has said that the government is open to considering a range of ways to try to lead the recovery of Australia's economy once this crisis passes. And he says it's not a case of dusting off old reports or old submissions on economic policy, that the government wants to look at a range of areas with fresh eyes. Now, exactly what that will involve in terms of potential tax or industrial relations reform is not yet clear, but the Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann, has given some hints as to what the government is prepared or not prepared to consider.
When you say nothing off the table, well, tax increases are off the table because we don't want to make it harder for business to be successful. We want to deliver lower taxes because we want to make it easier for business to be successful. We want to work with the states to ensure that we get aggressive deregulation measures through the process, making it easier for business to obtain approvals and the like, reduce the cost of doing business, making it easier to be successful. So I mean that is, I guess, the broad focus that we will be pursuing.
The Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann there. Now, National Cabinet is also expected to discuss schools this morning. The federal government has always insisted that its medical advice hasn't changed, that it is safe for schools to be open, but it's really up to the states and territories as to how they manage that. And we've seen some of the states and territories moving more quickly than others to try to get classrooms back to normal. The Federal Education Minister, Dan Tehan, says he'd like to see all schools operating as normal by the beginning of June.
Jade Macmillan there. Overseas, in the US House of Representatives has passed a new $760 billion coronavirus relief bill. The bill includes funding for small businesses and hospitals and pushes the total spending in response to the crisis to nearly $5 trillion. This comes as the US jobless rate climbed to levels not seen since the Great Depression, with more than 26 million people filing for unemployment benefits in the past 5 weeks. President Donald Trump says the bill will help workers.
A safe and phased reopening of our economy. It's very exciting, but it does not mean that we are letting down our guard at all in any way. On the contrary, continued diligence is an essential part of our strategy to get our country back to work, to take our country back. We're winning this and we're going to win it, and we're going to keep watching. We're going to watch very closely for the invisible enemy.
The Chinese city of Harbin has reportedly been locked down over fears a student from the US has sparked several COVID-19 cases. The city of around 10 million people has moved to curb a rapidly growing number of new infections thought to have been caused by a student returning from New York. Mainland China's tally of confirmed cases stands at more than 83,000. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, has warned Europe must remain clever and cautious when dealing with the pandemic. The Chancellor made the comments during a video conference with other EU leaders, the fourth summit on the coronavirus outbreak. They're expected to sign off on a $600 billion emergency fund to protect workers, businesses and countries worst affected by the outbreak. Human trials of a potential vaccine for COVID-19 developed at Oxford University in the UK will begin today. 500 people have signed up. Nick Dole reports.
The weather in the UK right now is making it very hard to stay inside indeed. The birds are singing, we've got temperatures in the mid-20s and sunny skies, but the vast majority of people are staying inside their houses and only venturing out for essential food, work or exercise. The best way out of this, we're being told, is a vaccine, and around the world scientists are racing to find one. Now at the University of Oxford, human trials have begun on a vaccine. Around 500 people are taking part. Half of them will get the vaccine, the other half won't, but it's a blind test, so no one will know.
Well, the trial itself will take at least a year, because we want to monitor these volunteers after they've been vaccinated and see what happens from a safety perspective, whether the vaccine works, and also to study their immune response to see how long it lasts.
The participants won't be directly exposed to the virus, given it can be deadly. Instead, they'll live in the community like everyone else, but that means it could take longer for scientists to work out whether the vaccine is working, because it'll depend on the exposure rate here in the UK. The government in Westminster has been very reluctant to say when this lockdown might end, or even the method in which the lockdown might be lifted. The Scottish First Minister has said it might begin with offices being redesigned so that employees can have more space, and schools being staggered in terms of attendance. But Nicola Sturgeon has said that anyone expecting a return to normality this year will be disappointed.
Social distancing and limiting our contacts with others will be a fact of life for a long time to come, certainly until treatments and ultimately a vaccine offer different solutions. So that means possibly for the rest of this year and maybe even beyond. And that's why talk of lifting the lockdown as if it's a flick of a switch moment is misguided.
As for the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, he's still recovering from the coronavirus. He is taking phone calls, but he's not actively running the government, and there's no indication of when he'll be back, given that 616 people were confirmed to have died of the virus in just the last 24 hours here. He'll have an even bigger task on his hands when he does return.
Nick Dole with that report. When India introduced a nationwide lockdown, almost all industries stopped operations and cars were forced off the roads. It's helped slow the spread of coronavirus, and it's also had another unintended consequence, with pollution falling to levels not seen in decades. South Asia correspondent James Oaten reports.
I've been living under India's lockdown for several weeks now, and it can still be a strange experience walking around Delhi's near empty streets. Over here you can see India Gate, and this place is usually packed, but as you can see, there's really no one around. But what I wanted to show you is not behind me, it's actually above me. Vivid blue sky. And this new low pollution Delhi is providing photographers with a unique opportunity.
Abhinav Saha has been documenting Delhi's Yamuna River for years. His previous images have captured horrific industrial pollution, in stark contrast to today.
You can get a very beautiful picture. You can see great blue sky, white clouds, greenery, and really beautiful Yamuna. So it's incredible, it's historic, and you don't know when you will get this opportunity ever again.
Everything is so clear. The clouds are coming daily.
Further north is photographer Anshul Chopra. He lives at the footsteps of the Himalayas, but saw them for the first time from his rooftop under the lockdown. A photo he took went viral.
I was standing on my terrace. I can see all the people standing at their terraces, looking at the same point and staring at the mountains like they were a dream. But, people say dreams come true.
This lockdown was never intended to be a long-term solution, and there are already plans to reopen some industry to help kickstart India's ailing economy. And when the cars return to the road and the factories reopen, it'll likely be the beginning of the end of this clean and green Delhi.